There are hundreds of new podcasts every day, and more content creators are leaning into this low effort, high reward style of content. However, starting a podcast can be daunting, which is why this video will provide you with a step-by-step guide on how to start a podcast in 2024. Now, podcasting can be fairly low effort. After all you need is a microphone, something to say, and somewhere to store your podcast online, right? Well, I mean, there's a little bit more to it than meets the eye, because you've got to ask yourself, why do you want to podcast? And then answer the uncomfortable question, who cares? And the fact that you've clicked on this video tells me that you need some more clarity around this question. So in this video, I'm going to share with you the exact 9 steps you need to do to get your first podcast out into the world. Now, before we begin, click subscribe and like this video and keep on coming back to this video as a benchmark to guide you in applying all these steps that we're going to talk about today. Okay, so let's get into it. In my experience, people are motivated to start podcasting because of one of 5 key intentions. Number 1, top of mind awareness. Number 2, lead generation as a hobby, maybe for legacy purposes. And number 5, for fame and fortune. Now, clarifying your true intention helps you know when you have achieved it. And this also helps you crystallize the value that you're giving people. And the success of your podcast depends ultimately on its content value. So you need to make sure that your podcast offers some sort of value to your audience. And that obviously leads to the question, what kind of podcast are you going to do? Is it an educational podcast? Is it an entertainment podcast? An inspirational podcast? Is it instructional? Like my podcast, Meaningful, is an informational podcast where I express my desire to search for meaning in all the experiences I go through in life. So my value is in helping others who've gone through the same or similar kind of experiences know that they're not alone and we're all connected in this life journey. So that brings us to the next important point, which is content. What kind of content are you going to talk about? And there are broadly 2 kinds of content. There's evergreen content and expiry content. Evergreen content is content that never goes out of fashion. So you're talking about money, relationships, health, motivation, inspiration, men versus women. The list goes on. Years from now, people are going to be searching and consuming this content. It just simply never goes out of fashion. Expiry content, on the other hand, has a specific deadline pegged to it, like gossip or news or sports. Now, once it passes, it's no longer relevant. Now, what you talk about is really up to you. But if I were you, I would want to produce a podcast that people will be listening to years from now. So the next step is to define your format. So once you're clear on your content, you want to know how to present that content. And that's where your podcast format comes in. You can opt for a solo interview, group, live audience format. It really depends on you and your personality. Now, when I say your personality, what I mean is that some people are naturally sanguine and feel better doing a podcast with people. It makes it more exciting. So if you're looking at a group or interview style format, which is more engaging and lively because of the back and forth banter, that's the format to choose. But if you're a flag like me, you're probably going to lean towards a solo podcast because you're comfortable in your own space. You want to be heard, not seen. And that's okay. Choose you. Do you. Next step, branding. You need to brand your podcast, which obviously means that you need a name, a logo, a tagline, and a punchline. And you also need a catchy, nice looking podcast cover. Now, there's a nifty tool that you can use called Canva, and I know you've probably heard about it. And the reason I love it is because it turns an ordinary person into an expert designer. It's got tons of beautiful, elegant podcast artwork templates. So all you have to do is scroll through them, pick the one you fancy, edit the text, and voila, you've got a beautiful podcast cover. But now something about artwork that I want to mention is, while most of you may want to pass by with nicely designed graphic artwork, it's much better to put your face to the podcast because people are attracted to human faces, not just fancy artwork. And you will find that you will grow your audience much faster. Again, this is something that you only need to do once. All you have to do is invest in one really nice, good studio photo, and that asset will be working for you for years to come. So at this point, we've identified our intention, our content, our podcast artwork, and our branding assets. It's now time to define our target listener. So remember what we said at the beginning of this video about answering the question, why should I care? The inability to answer this question from the very beginning is what makes a lot of erstwhile enthusiastic podcasters give up less than a year into podcasting. And one of the ways to avoid this is to be very, very clear about who you're talking to. Why? Because it makes it much easier when you're coming up with topics as opposed to trying to make content that appeals to everyone. And this is one of the reasons why you love your favorite radio station. It seems as if they're talking to just one person. And it's true, they are talking to just one real person with a subset of interests, beliefs, and personality. Back when I was on radio, we had this picture of a person that was printed and mounted in the studio. And we listed everything about this person, their name, their age, their status, their disposable income, lifestyle choices, opinions, and objections. Now, having all this written down helped us come up with content that was so relevant to this person that within months, a greater majority of people who were like this person were listening to us. Now, if you're still stuck and you're wondering how to do this, simply post the picture of your best friend and talk to that person. And as you record, put yourself in your listener's shoes and ask yourself the question, why should I care? For example, people living in Cape Town are probably not going to be as interested in what's happening in Accra unless it has something to do with, say, relationships or some sort of evergreen content. And likewise, a divorced 50-year-old man in Australia is probably not going to be too interested in something that relates to a 28-year-old single lady living in Johannesburg. So be very clear on the question, who are you talking to? Why should they care? Now, next up, we have imaging. Now, under imaging, I'm talking about well-produced intros, outros, jingles, and liners. Most podcasters skip this step and voice their intros, outros, and then jump right into the content. Now, I mean, you could do that, but I advise against it because, you see, the whole point is to make your podcast as memorable as possible. And good imaging does that. You know, when you've got different voices voicing different segments of your podcast, it sounds more interesting. And the good thing about this imaging pack is once you invest in it, again, it's a one-time cost. So think Rick Dees, for example. I mean, there's a reason why he has the #1 longest running countdown show. And yes, his content is well produced. Yes, his content is well researched. Yes, it is a countdown show, but the imaging is out of this world. Now, most podcasters don't invest in imaging, so they all sound the same. So this is your chance to sound different and be unique. If you want to get started with this, I'm going to recommend some resources in the description below. But for starters, you can check out AudioJungle for top quality, royalty-free music. This is my favorite go-to source for top quality music, or Epidemic Sound. But whatever you do, don't use any popular music from your favorite artists because it's probably got a number of royalty rights pegged to it. Now, you don't want to receive a call from Justin Timberlake saying, dude, man, you used my song, you owe me $1 million. You know, I mean, it would be good for him to call you, but probably to ask if he can be a guest on your show. Now, the thing I like about AudioJungle, coming back to it, is that they have fantastic music in practically every music genre that you can think of, from inspirational to pop, Afrobeat, reggae, jazz. And all you have to do is pay a one-time fee and you can use that track for as long as you wish. Now, for spoken jingles and liners, Fiverr is my top pick. And while you're there, check out Beryl Dube. She's my go-to source for authentic South African voiceovers. Just brilliant. Now, equipment. You will need a dynamic microphone, stereo headphones, an audio interface, a laptop, a digital audio workstation, and accessories like a pop shield and XLR cables. Now, you don't need to break the bank on this one. I see a lot of people investing in the Shure SM7B, but the truth is there are cheaper mics that will probably give you better quality than the SM7B. And not that I have anything against it, but I mean, if you don't have that high budget, then you don't need to sweat. Here are a couple of my favorites, which are all dynamic microphones, by the way. The Behringer XM8500S, the Rode PodMic, the Shure SM58 and SM57, the Shure Beta 87A, and the Electro Voice RE20. Now, one thing to note about the Shure Beta 87A is, if you look at all these videos that are on Instagram of the comedy shows and the stand-up comedy routines, the mic they're using is a Beta 87A, and that shows you just how good it is. And if you're going to use that, your podcast is going to sound really, really good. You will also need a DAW. And a DAW stands for Digital Audio Workstation. Now, this is a software that you need to edit and produce your podcast episode. Now, thankfully, there are a couple of really good free options out there, like GarageBand if you're an Apple user, or Audacity if you use Windows. I prefer Adobe Audition. Now, any of these programs are going to help you record, edit, and produce a really good sounding podcast. Great. So now let's talk recording. Now, it's important to note that if you record something that's distorted, there's no amount of post-production magic that's going to rectify it. So the easiest way to ensure that you always have a crisp, clear recording is to use a pop filter like what I'm using right here, and then to keep the microphone at least a fist away from your mouth. Don't come too close because it's going to pick up more of the bass frequencies and you're going to sound muffled. You're looking for a bright, crisp, clear recording. Now, I don't get tired of saying this. If you record badly, it doesn't matter what you do in post-production, it's just going to sound bad. Again, I'm going to go into more details on how exactly to guarantee a clean, crisp recording in my Adobe Audition tutorial. So the first thing that you need to do is become an email subscriber so I can let you know when that course is online. Now, let's talk about distribution. Once you're done with recording and editing, you're now ready to share your podcast with the world. And you will need a podcast hosting provider. Now, podcast hosting provider is a place where your podcast is stored online. So if anyone wants to listen to it, the hosting provider provides something called an RSS feed that links your podcast to your listener. But because hosting audio online takes a lot of disk space, a lot of hosting providers are going to charge you a monthly fee. But thankfully, there's some free ones out there. WordPress, for example, that offers you a free hosting platform. And I don't know why people aren't talking much about that. I personally use Spotify for podcasters, and this used to be known as Anchor until Spotify bought it. And the good thing about Spotify for podcasters is it's got options to distribute it to their Spotify audience. And the more people who listen to it, the more Spotify increases its reach and the more you gain new listeners. Speaking of which, let's talk marketing. Now, I wish I could tell you that once you upload your podcast onto Apple or Google Podcasts, the entire world is going to know about your podcast. But unfortunately, that's simply not the situation. And this is where podcasters get discouraged because Apple and Google Podcasts are nothing more than listing platforms. So all they do is list you in a category and provide a link to your podcast. But you will still need to do the heavy lifting and market your podcast to the world. There are thousands of podcasts online and no one knows and no one cares unless you do something about it. Now, the easiest way to start marketing is to start with your family and your close friend connections. Let them know, hype it up to your relatives, your aunties, your uncles. You want people clicking on that link. And then after that, head on to social media, but not just any social media platform. Use Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Now, I say Facebook because one of the best things that you can do is push a FB ad to a very targeted audience demographic. With Facebook, you can whittle down to an audience that is directly interested in what you're talking about. Now, if your podcast, for example, is about cats, Facebook literally allows you to segment down to that audience that lives, breathes, and talks about cats. That's where you need to market your podcast. Now, by the way, in this entire video, I'm focusing on a traditional audio-only podcast and not a video podcast. Now, if you want to grow your community organically, use LinkedIn. I don't know what those guys are doing with the algorithm, but it just works. They want you to be famous. There's not much you need to do. Just get on the platform and start posting and sharing some valuable content, and you're going to see your audience growing exponentially. You can also use YouTube, although I suggest that you produce trailers that you can upload on YouTube that push people to your website or your Apple, Google podcast link. And then use x.com to post short text snippets from your podcast along with a link to your latest episode. Now, one thing to be prepared for, it's going to take time to grow an audience. In my experience, you're looking at least 1 year. So the most important thing that you can do is point everyone that listens to your podcast to an email list to become subscribers. Now that way, when you publish your next episode, you simply have to shoot a quick email to your database and you have a ready audience that's ready to listen to your show. I'm going to say it again. The most important thing that you can do from the very beginning is build that email list. I will share more about the best email subscription providers that you should use as a content creator in a future video. So once your listeners are on your subscription list, you're able to connect with them one-on-one. You can get valuable insights about what they like about your podcast, about your content, what drew them to your content. To gain this kind of insights, I use ConvertKit, and I'm going to post another video soon about why I love ConvertKit. But for now, let me just say that I need to build a system around my content, and ConvertKit allows me to do just that. I can keep my listeners engaged. I can incentivize them with giveaways, prizes, shout outs, because everybody loves a shout out. I can do so much to interact with them and find out what kind of content they're keen on and develop content based on that. So get that email list working before you sweat too much recording 15 episodes or even one episode. Email subscribers, that's your currency. Put your email subscription list in your Facebook profile, your Twitter profile, your LinkedIn bio, everywhere. Push people onto that list, and suddenly you have a loyal audience that you can market every episode you publish for as long as you want. So by now you have a clear understanding of what you need to do in order to start your podcast, and I can't wait to see what you're going to create. And yes, if you already have a podcast, I'd love to listen to it and probably give you a shout out as well. So let me know in the comments below, and then don't forget to subscribe as well. We're going to talk soon. I'll see you again in the next video.